Welcome to Menopause the Positive Way, the podcast that inclusively supports Women Plus moving through their menopause journey with greater ease, control, and an empowered mindset. You can subscribe to this series wherever you get your podcasts. Brought to you by Pausitive Health, making life easier and helping you make a change for the better. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Menopause the Positive Way. I'm Courtney Pesic, and I'm your host. And today we have Laura Nozicka, the founder of Big Idea Tango, with over 30 years of experience in marketing, branding, and market research, primarily within healthcare and related industries. She serves as a workshop facilitator, qualitative market research moderator, speaker, and podcaster focused on enhancing the human experience in healthcare, particularly by supporting patients and healthcare executives through truth-seeking and change facilitation. Today, our conversation really is around what happens when women are not heard. Well, thank you, Laura, for joining us. I'm very excited for our conversation today.
Well, thank you, Courtney, for having me, and I appreciate the invitation, and I'm excited to be talking with you today.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your background and how we got here.
Oh, well, without taking up too much time and giving you the whole history lesson in my background, but I am from Chicago, and I've worked in many of the healthcare systems here in the Chicago area, many of the large systems in a marketing and community relations capacity. I also have experience in patient recruitment for clinical trials. And in the last 10 years, I have, as you had mentioned in my bio, I've been a consultant specifically in qualitative market research. So what does that mean? Courtney, have you ever been in a focus group?
No, I've wanted to be, though.
Okay. Well, if you've heard about focus groups, it's a group of people in a particular target market, let's say, and a company, any company, who wants to understand how people, customers might be using that product, what their needs are, what are some of their lifestyle nuances that they would or wouldn't use a product or a service. So really just understanding their worlds and how their products may or may not fit into it. And so from a healthcare standpoint, I have been conducting market research, either one-on-one interviews or focus groups where I am the facilitator. So those of you out there, if you've ever been in a focus group, I am the one who's guiding the conversation with a group of, could be 8 to 10 people. And most of my work, because it's steeped in healthcare, I've talked with thousands of patients, thousands of doctors over the last several years. And so that's what I've been doing. And out of those conversations that I've heard from patients, mainly women, who I consistently heard from about how they felt dismissed in their healthcare encounters with their physicians. And they even used pretty strong words like medical gaslighting. And I wanted to learn more about that and ask the questions that I wanted to ask outside of market research. And that's when I started my podcast, the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast.
Yeah, and I've listened to a couple of those episodes, and they're just fantastic. I mean, as we're going to talk and move into the topic of menopause in this, I feel like there is such this opportunity to deep dive and figure out how we can be more of an advocate and empower ourselves with anything that we're going through. And I think we look at our doctors for the end all be all answer, and it's so hard when we're not getting that answer. And even though we need to remember that doctors are human too, but we seem to go to them and have this expectation that they need to have the answer. And so then when we come back and we don't have an answer, we're in this gray area, right? So is there, with desperate for a diagnosis and unhooked women. We've listened, you've told the stories and heard the stories. And when you zoom out and look at those conversations collectively, what do you hear most often from women who feel unheard or misdiagnosed?
Yes, yes. So yes, I do have two podcasts, Courtney, as you mentioned, the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast, which I've had for coming up on 3 years. And my new podcast that's going to be released soon, Unhooked: Women, Wellness, and Finding Wild Joy.
I love
So
it.
it's a little bit of a different slant to helping women be heard from the standpoint of not just healthcare, but really listening to themselves and their own inner voice and understanding and figuring out what is it that I want, especially after a certain point in life. What is that joy? What is that thing I want? How am I taking different care of myself? Maybe you always took great care of yourself, but now you're taking care of yourself in a different way, especially after 40 and beyond all those fun things that happen to us, and trying to find joy in between trying to navigate all of that. So part of the wellness aspect, I really do look at it as helping women find their voice in the healthcare setting. And so when women come away with feeling dismissed, it really comes in different forms. But dismissal overall is interpreted in a way that I didn't feel heard. I feel like the doctor blew off my symptoms. The doctor wasn't really listening to me because he or she was too busy typing at the computer and putting notes in my chart. Things like that is how women walk away feeling, because yes, we want answers, and we're in the society of we need answers quick. We need everything now. We're accessing AI now to try to figure out what our diagnosis may or may not be. And then we're bringing all kinds of research and reams of paper, or bringing all kinds of chat GPT conversations to our doctors. And that's a whole nother point of conversation. But women are really walking away with not finding answers. I heard time and time again on my, not only on my podcast, but in market research, my clients are pharmaceutical and device and other healthcare organizations, as far as my clients are concerned, my client base. But I heard, I saw 5 doctors. I saw 10 doctors. It took me 2 years, 8 years, 10 years even to find a diagnosis. And I have one podcast guest, Mika Beeman, who is this rock star news writer in NYC. And she has a rare autoimmune condition called IgG4. And it's a condition that will produce what seems to be tumors. They're usually benign, but she was not able to find an answer for her symptoms, for her fatigue, for her pain, and why these tumors kept producing. And she had dozens of surgeries. She saw 30 doctors. It took her years and years and years to finally find the answer. And she was still seeing rheumatologists to find the answer, but it took the one rheumatologist who had seen this condition before. So she had to keep pushing for answers. She went to multiple hospitals. And even she said, I learned that I wasn't advocating appropriately for myself. I learned that I couldn't go into the exam room worried about the doctor's time. It was pretty stunning that she felt that she had to kind of walk on eggshells to explain her case. She said, the doctor would ask me, how are you feeling? And so I think we've all been in that situation where there's that little pain schedule, or the little smiley faces where you indicate what your pain level is. And she said, I would pick the one that maybe wasn't as high as the pain that I was experiencing. And I was blowing off my own symptoms because I didn't want the doctor to think I was a complainer or it was in my head or something psychological. And so women really are are gaslighting themselves in a lot of way and not stepping up and understanding that doctors really, they work for us, and we do have an expectation that they can help us, but not all doctors can for a variety of reasons, be it education, where they are in their career, what they've seen, insurance, burnout. There's so many different factors that women walk away, the reasons why women walk away feeling dismissed. But to have an expectation for yourself that you are prepared for those visits to tell your health story in a more succinct, efficient way.
Yeah, and for midlife, those start to build upon each other. So as we're seeing at the beginning of menopause, and we go in to see our doctor, it may just be a symptom or two. And we've seen what has been reported is that a third of doctors touch menopause through med school, and so what is this feeling of dismissal really doing to women at the beginning of their journey, of the beginning of this? How do we start to really talk? And as you just brought up, chat gpt, Google, MD, we're now kind of turning more to the AI side of things, but how does that dismiss? And maybe that's because we feel seen, right? Maybe just Google and that being able to put in a symptom or something can generate more than what maybe we thought we were getting out of our doctor. But how does that dismissal really play in effect for us starting off in journey and peri?
Well, I'm certainly not a clinician, as you know, but from what I've been told from women, we go in with some of the most bizarre like mystery symptoms sometimes, where unfortunately doctors are trained to create a list, if you will. They refer to it as the differential diagnosis list. So you could walk in with severe fatigue. Well, my goodness, fatigue could be a symptom of about,
Sure,
1,000 different conditions. And at that point, a patient is going down the track of multiple diagnostic testing and labs, and everything comes back normal. And in fact, the intro to my podcast is, it's all in your head. You don't look sick. It must be anxiety. Your tests are inconclusive. And these are the things that we hear over and over with a lot of different symptoms, but there's so many symptoms that I think that doctors don't necessarily consider to be menopause. So instead of really digging into, okay, great, we ruled out all kinds of hopefully terrible things. And so it's not the autoimmune condition, it's not cancer, it's not, you name it, something autoimmune or immunology related. So based on the labs and the testing, you're good. And so now women are walking around thinking, well, why do I feel like garbage all the time? And then you run into the situation where, particularly with gynecologists and maybe internists who do women's health as well, that getting your hormones tested, so your estrogen, all of the estrogens, testosterone, progesterone, other hormone levels, all come back maybe normal, but doctors will say, we don't test for hormones because they're so up and down. They have different levels every day. And to rely on them as a litmus for whether or not you're in perimenopause or you're past that and you're in menopause, it really makes it difficult for a woman to pinpoint what she has. It makes it difficult for a doctor to pinpoint it. And at that point, we still might be in this limbo of what do we have? Is this menopause? Because I think we know there's just dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of menopausal symptoms that we don't even really realize that it's a menopausal symptoms. And the fact that physicians are getting very little education on menopause in their training. That is not on their radar. The low hanging fruit, if you will, is what fits into that neat little box of what's the diagnosis.
So a lot of women in, especially in peri through post menopause use the term medical gaslighting. And you spoke about that a little bit. Based on your research and the physicians that you've spoken with, do you think many women experience care in this way? Like even when there's no harm intended?
So there's a lot that goes on the back end, if you will. So I like to talk about what happens on both sides of the bedside. Is
Awesome.
what I like to really bring to the forefront in the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast in particular, where I've interviewed both patients, I'll say patients, but women who have been going through a health journey trying to find a diagnosis. But I also have interviewed physicians with whom I've talked with about the difficult to diagnose and treat conditions within their specialties. And I've talked with neurologists, neurosurgeons, emergency medicine doctors, chiropractors. I've talked with pelvic floor therapists, which from a women's health menopause standpoint is something that we could talk about for a long time. And in fact, one of the physical therapists, pelvic floor therapists who I talked with actually came through from Positive Health, Alina Gurr. She's one of the PTs that was on my show. And just from a pelvic condition or pelvic floor issue, so many things change. Again, I'm not a clinician, but from what I know and my own experience, that whole ecosystem of the pelvic floor and reproductive organs, etc., things change, and we don't always realize that it's specific to menopause. We just think it's just, oh, I've always had that. Or like, for instance, I have endometriosis, and I've gone through my own treatment with pelvic floor therapy. But a lot of physicians who are aware of endometriosis, and that's certainly way higher on the radar these days too, and it does happen with younger women, but it still can affect you through menopause. A lot of it supposedly is hormone driven, and women may be gaslit even for something like that because doctors just think, oh, kind of like, oh, suck it up with the pain, take some painkillers. Oh, maybe we'll put you on birth control, or maybe you need some level of hormones, or worse yet, you should have a hysterectomy because that will cure the endometriosis, which that is not how endometriosis works. You still can have endometriosis once you've had a hysterectomy, a complete hysterectomy, by the way. But gaslighting from a menopause standpoint, again, can happen in so many different ways because, like I said, there's so many different symptoms, and doctors can keep throwing medications at it. Doctors might say, get more sleep, eat better, whatever that might be, but that doesn't get to the root of the problem. And I think that's what is happening from a healthcare system standpoint. And again, the doctors that I've talked with who, again, we talk about their conditions that they treat or the ones that are hard to diagnose. And then I would ask them, doctor, I hear from a lot of patients talking about feeling dismissed, and they use language like medical gaslighting. What do you think is going on the other side to make patients walk away feeling that way? And many doctors will talk about burnout. The burnout factor is huge in the medical community. And I know that as patients, we just want answers. I don't know how sympathetic most people are to physicians in particular, because doctors are the face of our healthcare. They really are. And that's where those expectations start in terms of a journey to get an answer. But they are talking a lot about burnout because especially physicians who are employed by health systems. There's time constraints. Doctors are expected to see a certain number of patients every day. There's only 15 minutes of time. And if you are a woman going for your wellness check, let's say, and you're only allowed 15 minutes for 1 year for an annual exam is
Right.
nothing for a doctor to really understand what has been going on with you. So burnout is huge, time constraints. We don't always understand how insurance works. And insurance is a huge factor as to why patients may or may not get the next test that they need, because as we know, insurance is calling the shots in terms of whether or not a test is feasible or a procedure. So there's that. There's things that are referred to as social determinants of health, health literacy, language barrier, just overall understanding of healthcare language and lingo. And there's so much. And so there's all these factors that go against doctors being as proficient, I think, as they would like. I don't want to say that doctors are purposely going around dismissing patients, but even from the standpoint of technology, your electronic medical record, there are certain things that have to be in the chart at a certain point in time. And they're going home on weekends charting all day long. And so doctors really don't have they don't have glamorous lives. Many of them don't, because they're going home, taking time away from their families, and they're charting or following up. I talked with a physician who's has a huge practice in I believe he's in Arkansas, and he's a family medicine doctor, and he's also board certified OB-GYN, and he's delivering babies and doing C-sections and all of that. He said, I go home at night and I have to put through 39 prescriptions. And so I don't think most patients understand the workload that doctors do have on their plates. Not to say, again, that we are overly sympathetic to that, because we're trying to have great lives. And I think doctors want patients to feel well and have great lives. But these are some of the things that are happening on the other side of the bedside.
Yeah, and that's kind of it's a tough combination to make, right? I think, kind of as I was opening, saying, we go to doctors for this immediate answer, and kind of like what you had said too, like it's almost like getting up the nerve to speak to a doctor about how you're feeling inside, and then it can be played off, as I think the whole conversation, as you were saying, you could be. Hopefully we've got a great doctor that you're having great conversations with, but on the other side, feeling dismissed or feeling gaslit, and finding that, we want to be empowered, especially in this time of life, as we're going through these symptoms, and each symptom's different. So even talking to a friend, and as I've seen a lot now on TV or on commercials, and maybe it's the yellow Jeep, analogy of, once you start talking about it, you're kind of seeing it everywhere. But, I even saw a body wash the other day for peri through post menopause. And I was thinking, like, holy moly. But I think the conversation, we're getting so much light around it that women now are starting to feel a little bit more empowered. So maybe there's this disconnect of feeling that dismissed when we've actually now got the empowerment, and as we're learning through this podcast and other podcasts that are out, and we're doing our best to inform women, right? So, we really want to help our listeners and people come with the words, come with the opportunity. And there's, we're hoping that, this opportunity can help women really feel empowered when they're going through this journey, because they're all so different. All the feelings are so different.
Yeah, and I think too, Courtney, with what Dr. Edwards is doing with Positive Health, in addition to so many other physician influencers that are out there that are really taking a huge stance on getting menopause education out there, not only for women, but also for physicians in their own communities. I think that there's a lot more, to your point, a lot more awareness out there with social media. a blessing or a curse or both. But for this purpose, there's so many influencers out there that are talking more and more about menopause and symptoms, and even things like dry eye or tinnitus, ringing in your ear, as being a symptom of menopause, itching, just some super bizarre things that you go into a doctor and you start rolling all these things down. Like, oh, doctor, I have itching. Well, most likely the doctor is assuming an allergy and saying, take an allergy pill and here's some cream. And when all along it's hormone driven. And so there's so much trial and error, I think, with menopause to try to figure out what exactly is going on.
Yeah, agreed. And as the journey keeps going, there's just it morphs. It becomes different from year to year, from month to month, from beginning to end, throughout the journey of it all. And one thing I want to circle back into is that you recently, as we were talking before, prior to this, but you recently had a mammogram and it sparked a huge response, kind of went viral. And why do you think that story really resonated so deeply with women? And what does it reveal about, about misinformation and maybe preventive care?
Yeah. Yes. So I did, Courtney. I had a diagnostic mammogram back in January, and certainly a callback for a diagnostic is just ridden with a huge amount of anxiety. So any of you ladies out there who've been called back, and they say most of the time it's nothing, but it doesn't come off like a nothing when you get that call initially. And typically with a diagnostic mammogram, they're very focused on what that area of question or in question is. And then typically there's an ultrasound that gets tagged on after that, most likely in the same visit. And so I had this mammogram, diagnostic mammogram on my left side, and I was given 3 views. So the tech took 3 views. The last view, she changed the paddle. So it's the thing that squishes you on the top. And she changed it out to a smaller one to really focus in on that one spot that was questionable. And it hurt so badly and I'm not a wimp when it comes to mammograms. I have more dense tissue. And for women out there, again, the experience is all different. Some people have high tolerance for pain and it's not as bad. Women who are smaller might have more pain. Women who have had cancer, who of course are still getting mammograms and are dealing with scar tissue and whatnot. So it's different for everyone. For me personally, it was painful, the second one. So I was at breakfast with my mom after that test, after that mammogram. And luckily, as I knock on wood here, everything was fine. So I have to go back 6 months to get a follow-up. But we went to breakfast and there were pancakes on the table. And I said, Mom, this is exactly how I felt getting that second, this diagnostic mammogram. I felt like I got squished like a pancake. So my I don't know, my sassy side of my brain said, oh, I'm going to do a quick little video, kind of an AI video, see what AI can come up with to demonstrate a pancake being squished by a mammography machine. And I put that 6-second video on one of my social media accounts. And before you know it, Courtney, so this was January, to this day, there are well over 500,000 views on that video and over 700 comments from women and some men actually about how they feel about their experiences about mammography. Now, I'm, again, not a clinician. I am not here to argue the science of mammography, but there's a lot of controversy, I'll say. There's debate. I won't say maybe, yeah, there probably is some controversy, but I'll use the
Sure.
term debate for the purposes of our conversation. There's a lot of debate on the efficacy, if you will, of mammography. There are women who, in those comments, said, if I didn't get a mammogram, I would have never known about even my stage 1 breast cancer. It saved my life. I read a lot of those comments. Other comments were around, I had one mammogram. It was so painful. Never again. Felt like it was pulling. It felt like torture. Mammograms are barbaric. These are the kinds of descriptions that a lot of women are using to describe their mammography experience. Other women, which was very interesting to me, and now again, I've worked in the healthcare systems in Chicago, and as a marketer, part of my charge was to increase or encourage women to get their annual screenings. And it was interesting to me that it's not just about, hi, patient so-and-so, it's time for your annual exam. Please schedule at this number. And the only prep that you get is no lotion, no perfume, no deodorant. I mean, that's it. There is no other expectation setting, communication whatsoever. So when I started seeing things like, it's barbaric in these kinds of conversations, but there are many women out there who believe, and maybe there's some literature out there about this. Again, I don't know, but there's many women who do believe that mammograms have some tendency to actually cause cancer. The compression of the tissue, the radiation. Many women would love to lobby, if you will, for ultrasound being the gold standard for screening. And from what I understand, mammograms versus ultrasound and what they're testing for and what they're looking for are different things. It's a different way to view the tissue, which is why we have that follow-up ultrasound, because it's looking at the tissue in a different way. And so there's a lot of barriers, I would say, to clinicians and hospitals actually encouraging women to get their screening mammograms. And so just from that standpoint, there's just a huge opportunity for better education, not just from a menopause standpoint, but breast tissue does change during menopause as well. And so that could be the very reason why there's a potential finding on a mammogram, because our breast tissue is changing also. So I just don't think that there's, it's all those things that mom never told you that was going to happen. And, I think now we understand why some of our mothers acted the way they did when they were of a certain age. I had an aunt many years ago when I was a little girl. I would come home from school and I would go to my grandmother's house after school, and her older sister, would be there sometimes because she lived nearby, and she would just walk over. And my aunt Cecilia would be sitting at the kitchen table, and she would just look at me and start crying. And that was the big joke in the family, that Auntie Celia is crying for no reason. What is her problem? What is she sad about? And then she would laugh. It was really funny. But when I think about it, and think about my demeanor these days, where somebody could say something to me, or I see something on TV. I never really understood why women cried at commercials after a certain point in time, where you get all sappy for some reason. And I thought,
I get it.
Oh my gosh, this must be why Auntie Celia was crying all the time for no reason, because it was her hormones. But this was back in early 80s, I would say, late 70s. And then, of course, well beyond before that, this conversation about the change didn't happen. And you can go even further back of hundreds of years, where any woman who would have some kind of outburst, let's say, or in some just undescribable pain, let's say, were criticized and referred to as hysterical. So hysteria still in many ways, I feel, does carry through in terms of the training that doctors have. And after a while, especially in the emergency room where you see patients coming in over and over again, I think there is still some of that happening.
Yeah. And to keep going with that, like, many of our listeners are thinking, I've got 10 minutes to speak to my doctor, kind of revisiting what you were talking about. Where do I even begin? Based off your research and your playbook, what are some of the things and what are some of the shifts that women can make and make that good communication, a good conversation? What does good look like in advocating for yourself on a clinical visit?
Yes. Well, I think many of us, myself included, regardless of all this experience that I do have interacting with the healthcare system and working in the healthcare settings themselves, I think a lot of times we have that white coat syndrome where we feel all prepared and you're driving to your doctor's office and you're thinking about the 12 things that like this is what I'm going to lay out to the doctor. And then you get in the room and there could be just one single little cue from the doctor that he or she is in a hurry. And now the doctor's all of a sudden asking you the questions, and now you're feeling rushed. You're feeling like you're walking on eggshells, and all of a sudden you're gaslighting yourself thinking, well, maybe I am okay. Maybe I'm fine. You know how it is. You go to the doctor and like your elbow hurt, all these days, and then you get the doctor, it doesn't hurt anymore. Right. And now you're fine all of a sudden. But I think that, as women, we don't give ourselves enough credit sometimes for believing in our voice and what that inner voice, that intuition is telling us, that if we're not feeling well, you're not feeling well. I mean, it's not something that you should be lying to yourself about, or like I said, gaslighting yourself. And so patients are looking for a partner. They want to be believed, of course, that their pain or their whatever it is, fatigue, whatever the symptom is real. So they want to be believed. They should feel that they deserve answers. And even if a doctor doesn't know, I think that patients would rather hear, I don't know, but let's keep going and see what we can figure out. And I think that that language really lends itself to a partnership role that the doctor is willing to take with patients. And I always say, I don't know how much we can change how doctors doctor. We may not even be able to help with how they communicate with patients, but can we train doctors? Can we as patients train doctors to be better communicators by being prepared, by asking the right questions or the questions that are important to you? So when you do have only 10 minutes, the doctors that I've talked with, who I've asked, what do patients need to do to better prepare for visits and their time in an exam room? And they want patients to have a very succinct timeline, if you will. Let's say you've had symptoms for a month or 3 months, whatever it might be. When did they start? What are they? Did they start to escalate? At what point in time? Where are you now? What have you done for those symptoms? Have you tried whatever, a painkiller or a vitamin or meditation, or you're exercising more, whatever it might be, heat, cold, ice, whatever the pain might be. What have you done? What are you taking? A lot of times they will, almost always now, they're confirming the medications that you're currently on. And I think things like supplements and whatnot, doctors should be asking about that also, because if they're not, you should at least make them aware, I think, of supplements that you're taking and what for, and kind of how you learned about the supplement and what the expectations are as to what you want that supplement to do. Because maybe it's some medication issue. Maybe a supplement is affecting how a
Sure.
medication works, so they're not interacting the right way. So I think having that history well written out in front of you, I think is something that would make a visit more efficient. And hopefully, as patients prepare more for visits, doctors see that and they hear from the patient first. Ask the patient, tell me what's going on with you, and they listen. But it's really about having your talk track ready to roll and prepared for the doctor, because again, you get in that parking lot and it's crazy trying to find a parking. I'm not down for people who are reckless drivers by any means, but I do give some grace to people in hospital and medical office building parking lots, because you don't know what their situation is. You don't know what news
Sure.
they just heard. You don't know what they heard about a loved one. You don't know if their role as a caregiver, and they're dealing with a whole lot of new responsibility potentially. But we get in that harried conversation and now we're in the room and we forget everything. So I think really being prepared for those visits is one of the key ways that we can advocate for
Yeah.
ourselves and make sure that we get what we need out of the
Yeah, I
visit.
know for me, I've been lucky enough to have my doctor since I was 12, but I've started the past couple of years writing down all the stuff that I write, because as soon as I'd get in there, he'd be like, "Oh, Courtney, how you doing?" And it's like, "Great." And I've completely forgot about the 12th list. I was like, I was happy to see him, and then I, have that kind of joy that's going on to see my doctor since he's been such a big part of my life for so long. And then, then I'm happy to see him. And then I've just forgot the 12 things that have been going on and all that kind of stuff. So the past couple of years with dealing with menopause, I've written down the things before I've gone in and been like, all right, let me get my checklist out, because yeah, I mean, it's totally true. And I think that somebody would feel that way too, if you had a new clinician, or if you were trying, or maybe this is, especially if you're going to go get a second opinion or a third opinion, hopefully that you've got this written down and that you can really kind of check that off. So we've had a couple of great guests on here that I've really taken their supplemental advice, and the herbalist that we had on, and it has been really great to add some of these things to my daily routine. But when I was talking to my compound pharmacist, I really had to make sure to add those supplements in, that I was taking them, to really be sure that, nothing was cross-contaminating or didn't become a blocker. But, the more education that I've gotten and stepped outside, it's been absolutely fantastic in learning more about this. So as we close, what are 3 things that you would like our listeners to know?
Well, Courtney, I think the top 3 things that listeners should know, or at least consider, is that one, they do have a voice. And I think that's one of the most important things when it comes to our health. I don't think there should ever be a time that a woman should think that she's bothering a physician their with their symptoms, or feeling like it's incidental, like it doesn't matter. But it does, because you hear those stories about how a woman felt, oh, well, maybe it's just a little heartburn or a little acid reflux. And they, in fact, were having a heart attack. And so I don't think that any symptoms should be dismissed. I don't think anything should be looked at. Something should not be looked at as a nothing. So I think that's something that's really important. So I think the second thing is that women should be very clear on what it is that they define for themselves as health. What's wellness and health for you, and how does that factor into your world? Now, we all can't be going to yoga classes every day, and some of us do meditate, but you can't be on a retreat every day, right?
Right.
all day long. So, so I would say to find those little moments of joy, I think, is what's important. That a lot of how we feel about ourselves physically reflects on how we're feeling emotionally or psychologically. And so what are those things that we can do for ourselves, whether it's meditation or just stopping to have a cup of tea in their favorite, hey there, pretty lady cup. Whatever it might be, I think that to find that joy from a psychological standpoint really can make us feel better physically. And it doesn't mean you have to go run marathons or whatever. Just go out for a walk, stand outside, smell some fresh air. And I think, as we all know, it all works together and it works very holistically. So I think that we need to find those times of joy in our lives. I think number 3 is that there's no one cookie cutter way for us to handle and manage our health. So like the women who commented on the mammography video, the squishing pancake, some women don't feel that mammograms are for them. That's certainly your choice, and that's okay. For you to feel the way you feel. If that's what's important to you, then fine. So I really think that even though doctors have what's referred to as a standard of care, it's that kind of standard algorithm of, well, we'll start you with, pain medication, something off the shelf. Then we'll do heat, and you should do this for 3 weeks. And then you should go to physical therapy for, 4 weeks. Let's say it's some back pain or something like that. So there's the standard of care, and then there's what works for you. And I think that that's very hard to get through to a physician also when they're trained on, here's the steps of how we treat things. And I think that if you feel that something doesn't work for you, I think that it's up to you to be your own advocate and say, doctor, that's not something that will work for me. What are the alternatives? And push your doctor to see if there's other things that you can do. And I think most likely there are different ways and modalities to approach a problem. And I think that you owe it to yourself to challenge a physician if you're comfortable with that. There's many people who really look at physicians as kind of the authority figure, and in many ways they are in their own field, of course. And some people are afraid to challenge their doctors or just to ask questions. And I don't think that does you much of, there's a disservice there if you don't ask questions or ask, well, why doctor? Why do you feel that that's the best approach for me? What are the side effects? Tell me about alternatives that I might be able to consider. And if that doesn't work for you, never be afraid to get a second opinion. If you're worried about some loyalty factor to your doctor, trust me, doctors are busy enough. They're not necessarily worried that they might lose a patient. There's enough to go around, but I think those are things that you shouldn't worry about and not be afraid to advocate for yourself in that way.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Laura. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. And I think our listeners are really going to take a lot of this information and as they're building their toolkit for words and opportunities to talk more with their doctor and experiences, I think this has really opened and shed a light on, a different perspective of their journey. So we really want to thank you. Thank you for being here. And to all our listeners, thank you for joining again. And visit us on our first Wednesday of every month where we have a new podcast up on the website. And here's to your continued health. We are so glad you joined us for this episode of Menopause, the Positive Way, and hope you will share this podcast with friends and family. You can subscribe to the series wherever you get your podcasts. Along with this podcast, Positive Health also offers a holistic, one-stop digital health experience supporting your body, mind, and spirit during the menopause journey. If you or anyone you know is looking for guidance, education, and services that address the many symptoms and needs experienced during your menopause journey, you can become a member of our pilot program. And you can join by visiting our pausitivehealth.com website. That's PAUSITIVE health.com, making life easier and helping you make a change for the better.
This is an educational podcast where the views of our guests do not necessarily reflect the views of Pausitive Health. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Pausitive Health does not provide medical advice.